At first glance, it doesn't look like something designed for survival. Just a small brown bar, rough edges, plain wrapping, no bright colors, no brand name, no promise of sweetness. To most people, it looks like a piece of chocolate you might find at the bottom of a backpack and forget about. But this particular bar was never meant to be enjoyed. In fact, soldiers were quietly told something unusual about it. Not when to eat it, but when not to. During World War II, the United States military began issuing a special emergency ration known as the Chocolate Ration D-Bar. It looked simple, almost unimpressive, yet the instructions surrounding it were strangely specific. The bar was designed to sit in a pocket, sometimes for months, untouched. Soldiers carried it through muddy trenches, across frozen roads in Europe, and inside cramped aircraft flying long missions over unfamiliar landscapes. And later, versions of the same concept would travel with American troops into jungles, deserts, and remote patrol zones around the world. From the outside, it seemed like nothing more than a dense block of chocolate. But the military engineers who designed it had a very different idea in mind. This was not a snack, it was not comfort food, and it certainly wasn't meant to taste good. In fact, the Army had one unusual request when it was created: make it just edible enough to keep a soldier alive, but not good enough to eat casually. Because this small, forgettable chocolate bar was never meant for hunger, it was meant for something much more serious, a moment when a soldier had nothing else left.
For American soldiers, the bar rarely sat in a dining hall tray. It usually lived somewhere quieter: a jacket pocket, the corner of a canvas bag, sometimes tucked into the side of a survival kit carried by pilots. It wasn't part of a normal meal. Most soldiers already had regular rations, canned food, field meals, and hot coffee whenever conditions allowed it. So the chocolate bar stayed where it was, unopened, sometimes forgotten. Yet commanders insisted every soldier keep one nearby, not because it was convenient, but because it represented something very specific: a line between having options and having none. During World War II, the U.S. military began issuing the dense emergency ration known as the Chocolate Ration D-Bar. It was deliberately compact, dense enough to survive heat, cold, and long transport, and small enough to disappear inside a uniform pocket. But the real purpose of carrying it had very little to do with eating, because the truth was, many soldiers never ate theirs at all. Some carried the same bar for months, through long marches, through ocean crossings, through patrols where supplies were never guaranteed. And then came the strange twist. The bar wasn't meant to solve hunger, at least not immediately. Military planners understood something subtle about human behavior under stress. If a soldier believed there was always one last reserve, panic stayed farther away, even if that reserve was just a small, stubborn block of chocolate. The presence of that bar changed something inside the mind. It meant the soldier was never completely out of options. And in war, that quiet belief could matter more than the calories inside the wrapper. Because sometimes, survival begins not with food, but with the knowledge that something is still waiting in your pocket.
In wartime, survival is rarely about dramatic moments. More often, it's about quiet margins. A little more time, a little more energy. One small advantage when everything else feels uncertain. The emergency ration, known as the Chocolate Ration D-Bar, was designed to live in that narrow margin, not as a daily meal, but as a silent backup plan. During World War II, American planners faced a simple but troubling reality. Soldiers did not always know when their next supply would arrive. Convoys could be delayed, aircraft could be forced down, patrols could move farther than expected. In those moments, hunger was only part of the problem. The deeper risk was uncertainty. Once a person believes there is nothing left, no food, no backup, the mind can shift quickly from patience to panic. And panic rarely helps survival.
The small chocolate bar helped prevent that moment, not because it was large, not because it was delicious, but because it existed. It meant a soldier always carried one last reserve of energy, something dense, compact, and stubbornly reliable. Just knowing it was there could slow the rise of anxiety. Pilots who carried survival kits understood this well. So did long-range patrol units moving through remote terrain. And later, as American forces served in other conflicts around the world, including the jungles of Vietnam War, the same philosophy continued to shape military rations. A soldier didn't need to eat the bar immediately. In fact, most tried not to, because the bar represented something more valuable than calories. It represented control. A quiet reminder that even in unpredictable conditions, there was still one resource waiting. And sometimes, the greatest survival tool in war is not the food itself, but the calm that comes from knowing it exists. In the winter of 1944, somewhere over occupied Europe, an American bomber crew faced a decision no one trains for. Their aircraft had been damaged during a long mission. The gauges were dropping, fuel was uncertain, and the landscape below was not friendly territory. The crew eventually abandoned the aircraft and parachuted into the darkness below. Moments like that rarely unfold the way people imagine. There is no dramatic music, no clear instructions, just cold air, unfamiliar ground, and the quiet realization that the next few hours may depend entirely on what you carried with you. In those years, many American airmen flying missions during World War II were issued compact survival kits. Inside were small items chosen with care: a map, a signaling mirror, a few emergency tools, and sometimes a dense bar of emergency food known as the chocolate ration D bar. Not large, not luxurious, just a small reserve meant to buy time. In several documented escape and evasion stories from the war, airmen moving quietly through unfamiliar countryside described something unexpected. They did not immediately consume their emergency food. Instead, they carried it, hour after hour, sometimes for days, because eating it meant acknowledging something they hoped would not be true, that rescue might not come quickly. So the bar remained in a pocket, unopened. Its presence alone changed the pace of decisions. Move slower, think clearly, avoid unnecessary risks. The chocolate itself did nothing dramatic, but its existence created a small space between fear and action. And in uncertain territory, that space could be the difference between panic and patience. Carrying a small object can change the way a person thinks, especially when that object represents the last option. For many American service members, the emergency ration known as the chocolate ration D bar became something more than food. It became a quiet agreement between the soldier and the future, a promise that no matter how uncertain the situation became, there was still one final reserve waiting. Psychologists who later studied combat survival noticed something subtle about this kind of preparation. When people believe they have absolutely nothing left, the mind can collapse inward. Decisions become rushed. Patience disappears. Fear starts to fill the empty space where planning should be. But when even a small backup exists, a tool, a ration, a signal device, something different happens. The mind slows down. Choices become more deliberate. Hope remains present just long enough to keep thinking clearly. For American troops serving across multiple conflicts, from World War II to the difficult terrain of the Vietnam War, that idea became deeply embedded in survival training. A soldier was taught to preserve resources, not simply to consume them. This required a form of discipline that many civilians rarely experience. Imagine carrying a dense chocolate bar for weeks, feeling hunger during long patrols, yet deciding not to eat it, not because you were told to avoid it, but because you understood what it represented. Eating the bar meant crossing a psychological line.
It meant admitting that the situation had moved from difficult to critical. So the bar stayed in the pocket, a quiet weight against the fabric of a uniform. Not heavy, but meaningful. Some veterans later described this feeling in surprisingly calm terms. They did not talk about the chocolate itself, they talked about what it symbolized: responsibility, restraint, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you still have one choice left. In many ways, the small ration was less about survival of the body and more about stability of the mind. Because war often tests something deeper than endurance. It tests whether a person can remain calm while holding the knowledge that their final option is still waiting, unused, in their pocket.
At first, the design sounded almost strange. When the U.S. Army began developing the emergency ration known as the Chocolate Ration D-Bar, military planners gave the manufacturer an unusual request: make it nutritious, make it durable, but do not make it enjoyable. This decision may seem counterintuitive. After all, most food is designed to encourage people to eat it. But emergency rations follow a different philosophy. Their purpose is not comfort. Their purpose is preservation. During World War II, American planners worried about a simple problem. If a ration tasted too good, soldiers might eat it long before they truly needed it. Hunger during long movements, boredom during waiting periods, or simple curiosity could easily lead someone to open the wrapper. Once eaten, the reserve was gone, and the psychological safety it provided disappeared with it. So the bar was engineered to sit in a strange middle ground, dense, slightly bitter, just pleasant enough to consume when absolutely necessary, but not appealing enough to become a casual snack. The result was surprisingly effective. Soldiers rarely reached for it unless conditions were truly uncertain, and because it stayed untouched, its symbolic value remained intact. The bar continued to represent that final margin of security. This philosophy would influence later military rations carried by American forces in other conflicts, including the difficult environments of the Vietnam War. Designing something to be deliberately untempting may sound unusual, but in survival planning, restraint can be just as powerful as abundance. And sometimes, the most effective tool is not the one people use often, but the one they carefully choose not to use. In the end, the small chocolate bar carried by American service members was never meant to be remarkable. It had no polished packaging, no comforting sweetness, and no heroic reputation. The chocolate ration D-Bar was simply a compact reserve issued during difficult times, first widely during World War II and later echoed in the survival philosophy used in other conflicts. Yet its meaning quietly grew beyond the calories it contained, because carrying that small bar was not really about food. It was about discipline, it was about patience, and it was about the strange comfort that comes from knowing one last option still exists. Across different wars and distant landscapes, from frozen airfields to humid jungles, American soldiers often carried tools they hoped they would never need, not to act, but to remain steady. In many ways, survival has always depended on that quiet balance, the ability to prepare without panic, to hold a final option without rushing toward it.